Kirk Franklin, the name once synonymous with gospel glory and untouchable faith, now stands in the center of a storm that feels almost cinematic. Imagine this, the very man who redefined gospel music for an entire generation, now confessing something no fan ever saw coming. Regret. Yes, you heard that correctly. Regret that burns deeper than applause, deeper than fame. For years, headlines screamed about explosive arguments, secret recordings, and a family feud so public it became late-night gossip. But today, Franklin has cracked the door wide open, exposing the pain that fame could never hide. Social media is in meltdown. Twitter threads drip with disbelief. Instagram reels replay old confrontations, captioned with fire emojis and question marks. Fans debate endlessly, was Kirk the wounded father, or the one who set the spark? This is betrayal playing out in real time, a family wound that refused to stay behind closed doors. People are not just watching, they are picking sides, dissecting every word as if it is a courtroom drama streamed live. And now the bombshell. In recent interviews, Kirk has confessed what no one imagined he would ever admit. Regret. Regret about every leaked phone call that went viral within minutes. Regret about every angry word that turned into a headline. Regret about the way this war scorched not only his family but also the legacy he built as gospel's fearless innovator. He is not just talking about pain, he is talking about the haunting feeling that something sacred slipped through his fingers. To truly understand the weight of this confession, we have to rewind to where the tension first caught fire. On stage, Kirk was unstoppable, stadiums on their feet, church choirs electrified. But behind the music, an entirely different rhythm was playing out. The friction with his eldest son, Kirk, was no sudden storm. It brewed silently for years, like a slow earthquake beneath a house of glass. Kirk himself has admitted that parenting under the harsh spotlight of fame can feel like an endless tightrope walk, every misstep amplified, every flaw exposed. When the now infamous phone recordings surfaced, the world heard not a polished gospel star, but a father boiling over. Fans were torn in two. Some defended him with fierce loyalty, calling it the raw reality of a parent pushed to the edge. Others accused him of hypocrisy, arguing that the man who led millions in worship had betrayed his own message. It was more than a family argument. It was a digital spectacle, hashtags trending, reaction videos exploding, and entire podcasts dedicated to dissecting every syllable. But here is where the twist cuts deeper than anyone expected. Behind the cameras and the applause, Kirk Franklin was quietly unraveling. He has now revealed that each public clash left scars that music could not heal. He felt the pressure of holding the microphone in one hand and his breaking family in the other. He feared that every misstep would not just haunt his son but also poison the faith of those who looked to him as a spiritual guide. This revelation has shaken gospel culture to its core. Producers, pastors, and even longtime collaborators are publicly grappling with what it means. Some say this confession is redemption, a father brave enough to own his failings. Others whisper that the damage is already carved into history. Either way, the industry is buzzing with one question: can the architect of urban gospel rebuild trust when the very foundation of family seems cracked? And still, Kirk Franklin is not running from the fallout. He is speaking with a rawness that slices through polite church talk. He admits the nights when silence felt like punishment, when he replayed every headline and wished he could snatch the words back. He describes regret not as a passing mood but as a heavy shadow that follows him from the pulpit to the studio. It is the kind of confession that forces even his harshest critics to stop and listen. So what does this mean for his future? Will the world remember the groundbreaking music or the thunderous family war? Franklin believes this moment can still become a testimony, a warning, a lesson, and perhaps a strange kind of healing. But make no mistake, this is not just a celebrity apology. It is the public unraveling of a gospel legend, a saga of pride, pain, and redemption playing out in real time. And as fans, critics, and believers keep refreshing their feeds, one thing is clear: the story of Kirk Franklin's regret is far from over. What began as the usual tug-of-war between father and son, those late-night disagreements that most families quietly survive, slowly mutated into something darker. Year after year, hurt feelings hardened into silent walls. Misunderstandings festered like hidden cracks, and trust began to rot away, one unspoken word at a time. For years, this private ache stayed locked inside the Franklin household. But in 2021, the lid finally blew off. That year, Kirk Franklin detonated a bomb no one saw coming. He released an audio recording of a phone call with his father that sounded less like a conversation and more like a collision. On the tape, Kirk Franklin's voice thundered with rage, every syllable raw and unfiltered. Fans who had only known him as gospel's polished ambassador of grace were jolted. Within minutes the clip was everywhere, blazing across Twitter trends, popping up on Instagram feeds, dissected in Facebook comment wars, and echoed on every gossip podcast that could grab a mic. The gospel world reeled. Congregations that once swayed to Franklin's anthems were suddenly whispering in church lobbies. How, they asked, could the man who preached forgiveness with such fire speak to his own child with words that cut like knives? And yet others pushed back fiercely. They argued that Kirk Franklin was not an angel on a pedestal but a human father in the middle of an impossible storm. The debate turned social media into a digital courtroom, with strangers forming juries and handing out verdicts in real time. But that viral clip was only the trailer for a much longer and more complicated drama. Franklin later revealed that this fight did not erupt overnight. Behind the curtain were years of desperate peace talks, family counseling sessions that ended in silence, private meetings that dissolved into more hurt, endless attempts to mend a relationship already frayed beyond recognition. The world heard 45 seconds of fury, but what it actually caught was a flash of lightning exposing years of thunderclouds no one was supposed to witness. By the time the recording surfaced, both father and son were carrying wounds that went far beyond a single argument. The audio was not an accident. It was a window into years of unresolved pain, resentment that had been quietly boiling until it finally found a microphone. And once that sound hit the internet, there was no putting it back in the box. As the clip ignited the digital landscape, the question hanging in the air was not just what had happened, but how Kirk Franklin would answer when his private anguish became the world's latest spectacle. The response came quickly. Within a day, Franklin posted a video to Instagram, his face heavy with the weight of the moment. He admitted that he had lost his temper and that his words were wrong. He spoke without excuses, a gospel titan suddenly stripped to a humbled father asking for forgiveness. Yet even in his confession, another twist surfaced. Franklin explained that what the world heard was not the full story. He described a relationship under siege for years, a history of counseling sessions and reconciliation attempts that kept collapsing. And then came the most piercing detail. He alleged that Kirk had secretly recorded their private calls, transforming sacred family struggles into public ammunition. What many first saw as an angry outburst now looked like betrayal wrapped inside betrayal. The reactions split the public like a lightning strike. Supporters praised Franklin's bravery, calling his apology a rare act of accountability in a celebrity culture built on denial. Critics were far less forgiving. They said the statement felt like strategic damage control, a polished PR move meant to calm the storm without owning its deepest causes. To them, the issue was bigger than one phone call. It was about whether a man who sings of grace and reconciliation was truly living those words when the spotlight dimmed. This was the crucible that would define everything that followed: the leaked audio, the bruising debates, the confession of regret. In one weekend, a private wound became a public reckoning, and Kirk Franklin's life as gospel's unshakable icon changed forever. The gospel world was already rattled, but what happened next turned a family dispute into a cultural earthquake. Pastors, gospel singers, and high-profile Christian influencers began to weigh in like commentators at a heavyweight fight. Some rallied fiercely around Kirk Franklin, reminding critics that even spiritual leaders bleed. They argued that raising adult children is a battlefield of its own, especially when those children carry scars the public will never fully see. These voices insisted that a single outburst did not erase decades of ministry, music, and heartfelt service. But others saw something far more troubling. They claimed the incident cracked open a larger hypocrisy in gospel culture, a culture that often parades perfection while hiding brokenness behind perfectly pressed Sunday suits. To them, Kirk Franklin's furious words were not just a slip of the tongue. They were evidence of a deeper, unspoken tension between image and reality. The debate was not merely about one heated phone call. It became about what Kirk Franklin symbolized. For years, he had been gospel's great innovator, the joyful bridge between church tradition and hip-hop swagger. When that bright image clashed with the dark fury of the leaked audio, fans felt whiplash. And yet, another current was pulling in the opposite direction. While some backed away, others leaned in closer, almost protectively. They saw not hypocrisy but humanity. They reminded the world that every believer stumbles, that even icons lose their temper when family wounds cut too deep. They argued that faith was never about perfect composure, it was about the hard, unglamorous work of growth. In their eyes, Franklin's vulnerability did not tarnish his testimony. It made it real. Social media feeds turned into battlegrounds of grace and judgment, with hashtags swinging between outrage and empathy hour by hour. Still, a single apology video was never going to seal this fracture. The tension between Kirk and Kirk continued to throb in public view, a wound that refused to close. As curious eyes dug deeper, more layers began to surface, layers of hurt that stretched back years before that infamous recording. And that is when Kirk himself stepped forward, fanning the flames in a way that no one could ignore. Kirk Franklin, long known as a free spirit and sometimes troubled soul, began speaking out with startling candor. He took to social media like a man on a mission, dropping fragments of a painful family history into the endless scroll of Instagram stories and live streams. He insisted that the viral audio was not an isolated explosion but the soundtrack of a lifelong struggle. To him, it symbolized years of feeling unheard, unseen, and emotionally abandoned. In interviews, Kirk drew a vivid picture of what it felt like to grow up as the child of a world-famous gospel icon. From the outside, people imagined blessings beyond measure. From the inside, he described a maze of shadows, always compared to his father's brilliance, always wondering if his own voice mattered. He spoke of striving for identity while feeling locked out of his father's inner world. Every sentence added gasoline to a fire that was already threatening to burn through the Franklin legacy. What began as a single shocking leak had now transformed into something far bigger, a public meditation on family wounds, generational trauma, and the crushing weight of impossible expectations. The Franklin household was no longer just a home, it had become a stage where the private pain of a father and son was being debated, replayed, and reinterpreted by millions. And as Kirk's revelations gathered momentum, one thing became unmistakably clear: the story of Kirk Franklin's regret was only beginning to unfold, and the next chapter promised even deeper revelations. The more Kirk spoke, the more uneasy the audience became. Was this simply a son lashing out in hurt, or was he exposing a deeper truth that his father's fans refused to see? Each statement he made sliced through the carefully polished image of Kirk Franklin as gospel's perfect father figure. While Franklin stood on world stages leading worship, producing chart-topping albums, and filling hearts with hope, his own son claimed he felt invisible, abandoned emotionally even as millions sang his father's praises. That shocking contrast between the joyful public icon and the lonely private father ignited attention fans could not ignore. And Kirk kept adding sparks. One day he dropped cryptic hints about hidden family pain, another day he spoke with painful clarity about feeling shut out. Every post felt like a riddle wrapped in grief, pulling followers deeper into speculation about what really happened behind closed doors. Twitter threads multiplied, YouTube commentary exploded, and Instagram lives turned into late-night courtrooms where strangers debated every word. Yet the picture was not one-sided. Kirk's own past complicated the narrative in ways no headline could cleanly explain. Arrest records resurfaced. Rumors of mental health struggles circulated. Some viewers said these details made his testimony unreliable. Others pushed back, warning that a troubled history does not erase genuine pain. The internet divided sharply, one camp fiercely believed the son, the other defended the father, and in between was a swelling conversation about generational wounds and the way unresolved hurt can pass silently from parent to child. Soon, this was no longer just the Franklin family's battle. Comment sections revealed that countless people saw their own lives mirrored in the story. Mothers wrote about estranged sons. Adult children admitted to decades of silent conflict with their parents. What began as a single celebrity feud transformed into a mirror for families everywhere, proof of how fame or no fame, old scars can shape entire generations. But the tragedy was sharpened by one painful reality: both father and son were speaking to the world, not to each other. Every interview, every Instagram post, every podcast response became ammunition fired across a digital battlefield. Instead of private reconciliation, millions witnessed a public war that etched new scars on both sides. The gospel community, once united in admiration for Kirk Franklin, began to fracture under the pressure. Some pastors and churchgoers described him as a flawed but devoted father fighting to protect his home. Others insisted that Kirk's cries for help were being drowned out by fame and image management. The question of who was right became less important than the realization that something holy, a family bond, was breaking apart in plain sight. Then came the twist almost no one predicted. While Kirk was revealing wounds to the public, Kirk Franklin himself was being forced into an uncomfortable confrontation with the man in the mirror. He had to reckon with how every word, every regret, and every unhealed conflict would define not just his career but his legacy as a father and a believer. What followed next would show how far the fallout could reach, beyond music, beyond church, beyond celebrity culture itself. The storm quickly spilled over from the Franklin household into Kirk's professional world. For decades, he had been more than an entertainer. He was the soundtrack of faith and resilience, the man whose songs served as sermons wrapped in melody. But when the leaked recordings and Kirk's accusations burst into public view, the foundation of trust he had built with millions of listeners began to tremble. Fans started asking hard questions. Was the man they worshipped with every Sunday living the very words he preached? Even churches that had long welcomed him with open arms hesitated. Some postponed invitations. Others stayed silent, unwilling to risk dividing their congregations. Meanwhile, mainstream entertainment outlets pounced on the drama, reporting on Franklin as if he were a Hollywood celebrity caught in a blockbuster scandal. Headlines that once celebrated his musical genius now buzzed with words like feud, betrayal, and family implosion. The result was unmistakable: Kirk Franklin's carefully built image as gospel's unshakable father figure had been shaken to its core. The story was no longer about one argument. It had become a national spectacle, a moral Rorschach test for fans, and a defining chapter in the life of one of gospel music's greatest legends. For gospel music fans, the shock was almost dizzying. This was not just another celebrity misstep. This was one of their spiritual anchors, an artist who had soundtracked their worship services and private prayers, suddenly pulled into a public firestorm. In a culture where appearance often weighs as heavily as truth itself, Kirk Franklin found himself fighting on two fronts, protecting both his name and the message that had defined his career. Yet instead of hiding, Franklin did something few expected. He chose radical transparency. In interview after interview, he spoke without varnish, acknowledging the deep hurt and openly confessing his flaws. He described himself as a man still in process, a believer struggling toward growth rather than claiming any finished holiness. That honesty landed like a lifeline for many. Supporters flooded social media with messages like, "If Kirk can own his mistakes, maybe there is hope for the rest of us." For a large part of his audience, the confession of imperfection made him feel more genuine, not less. But the storm left scars that no statement could erase. Some gospel radio stations quietly cut back his airplay, unwilling to risk their own reputations. Certain church networks backed away from booking him, worried that inviting Kirk Franklin might divide their congregations. His most faithful fans stood firm, but others slipped away, unable to reconcile the inspiring artist with the wounded father they heard in that viral recording. The ripple effects hit home in painful ways. Franklin's wife, Tammy, and their other children, once comfortably outside the limelight, were suddenly thrust under a microscope. Rumors spiraled online about how they really felt and whether they stood behind Kirk during the chaos. Commenters treated the family like characters in a reality series, dissecting every glance and silence for clues. What had been a private household turned into an involuntary stage. And still, Kirk Franklin did not vanish. He kept writing and releasing music. He filled venues. He accepted awards. Yet something fundamental had changed in how listeners heard his work. Every lyric about forgiveness, every soaring refrain about grace and redemption now carried a double weight. For some, it deepened the music's meaning, proof that